All right, folks, settle in, because you are not going to believe this one. Ever had an HOA try to tell you what color your petunias should be? Annoying, right? Well, imagine your HOA, or in my case, a particularly self-important HOA president, deciding your private barn, the one on your land, housing your prize-winning 3,000-pound bull, is the perfect spot for their annual shindig, without your permission, after you've explicitly told them no. Think that's crazy? Oh, it gets crazier. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and tell me the wildest HOA story you've ever heard. Because I think mine might just take the cake, the whole bakery, and maybe the wheat field it came from. Because when they decided to trespass and throw their party anyway, well, let's just say Baron Von Beefy, my aforementioned bull, became the surprise guest of honor, and I made sure they all got a very, very close introduction. My property is a bit of an anomaly in the increasingly suburbanized landscape of what used to be rolling countryside. I've got 10 acres, a comfortable old farmhouse, and the barn. The barn isn't some quaint, dilapidated structure. It's a significant, modern agricultural building I designed and had built myself about 5 years prior. I'm a retired large animal veterinarian specializing in bovine genetics and health, so this barn is more like a specialized bovine spa and research center than a hay storage unit. It has reinforced stalls, a small lab area, climate control in sections, and yes, plenty of open space, because working with animals the size of a small car requires it. Baron Von Beefy, a magnificent Charolais bull, is my pride and joy, a gentle giant, most Ophika, the time, but undeniably imposing. He's also worth more than most of the houses in the newer development that spawned our Rural Heritage Estates Homeowners Association, an HOA. I was technically part of, due to some ancient zoning agreement when the land was parceled decades ago, but one that had, until recently, concerned itself mostly with road maintenance and the shared mailbox cluster. Then came Brenda Milkington, a name almost too on the nose for someone who would prove to be such a drain. She and her husband, a perpetually bewildered-looking man named Gerald, who dealt in financial instruments, which I suspect was code for timeshares or crypto scams, had moved into the largest new build, a beige McMansion that screamed, "New money, no taste." Brenda, with her lacquered blonde helmet of hair, outfits that always seemed one size too small and 2 seasons too bright, and a voice that could curdle milk at 50 paces, quickly maneuvered herself onto the HOA board and then, through a campaign of sheer attrition and terrorizing the previous mild-mannered president into early retirement, became President Brenda. Her chariot of choice was a pristine white Escalade, usually parked haphazardly, taking up at least 1.5 spots, much like her personality. The first I heard of Brenda's grand plan for my barn was via a glossy flyer stuck to my mailbox with what looked suspiciously like chewing gum. Annual Rural Heritage Summer Gala. It proclaimed in offensively bubbly font, "This year, hosted at the charming rustic Henderson Barn, an evening of community, cocktails, and country chic." I blinked. Henderson Barn. My barn. Charming and rustic it might appear from a distance to the uninitiated, but it was a working facility. And nobody, absolutely nobody, had asked me about this. I assumed it was a misprint, a colossal, Brenda-sized error. I crumpled it up, slightly annoyed, and went about my day, which involved administering a rather tricky course of antibiotics to one of Baron's less cooperative lady friends. A week later, another flyer appeared, this time with an RSVP card and a note scrawled in purple ink at the bottom. "Brenda M. expects a full turnout. It's going to be fabulous." Still, no direct contact. Now I was moving from annoyed to concerned. This wasn't just a misprint. This was a deliberate plan. I walked over to my fence line, looking towards the newer houses. The development was carefully designed so that my property acted as a sort of scenic, rural backdrop for them, something I hadn't minded, as it kept them at a comfortable distance. But Brenda, it seemed, viewed my backdrop as her personal stage. I decided a direct approach was needed. I found the HOA's newly and garishly redesigned website, courtesy of Brenda's nephew, apparently a web visionary, and got Brenda's contact number. Brenda Milkington, HOA President, how may I enlighten your day? The voice was exactly as abrasive as I'd imagined. Brenda, this is John Henderson from the old farmstead on West Ridge Road. A pause. Oh, Mr. Henderson, so glad you called. I was just about to pop over and discuss the final touches for the gala. We're thinking fairy lights, loads of them, and a quaint little bluegrass band. Won't that be just darling in your barn? I took a breath. Brenda, there seems to be a misunderstanding. My barn is not available for any gala or any other event. It's a working agricultural facility, not a party venue. The silence on the other end was frosty. Not available? She finally sputtered, as if the concept was entirely alien. But Mr. Henderson, the flyers have gone out. Everyone is expecting it. It's for the community. It's my private property, Brenda, I stated, keeping my voice level, and it houses valuable livestock, including a 3,000-pound bull. It's not suitable, nor is it available. You'll need to find an alternative venue. Alternative venue? Her voice rose several octaves, approaching the ultrasonic range favored by bats and agitated chihuahuas. But your barn is perfect. It has that authentic country feel. It says so right on the flyer. We can't just change it. People are counting on this authentic experience. The only authentic experience anyone would get in my barn uninvited involves large quantities of manure and a very surprised bull, I said, my patience beginning to fray. I am formally telling you no. Do not proceed with any plans involving my property. Well, I never, she huffed. This is incredibly unneighborly of you, Mr. Henderson. The HOA has certain rights, you know. Common areas, community benefit. My barn is not a common area, Brenda. It's on my deeded land, a fact you can verify at the county records office. I suggest you do so. And I expect this to be the end of it. I hung up before she could launch into another tirade. I felt a grim satisfaction, imagining her sputtering into the receiver. Surely that would be the end of it. A clear, unequivocal no. How naive I was. Brenda Milkington, I was rapidly learning, did not operate in a reality governed by things like property rights or common decency. She operated in Brenda world, where her desires were law. And in Brenda world, the party was still on. My barn, my problem, her fabulous gala. The stage was being set, not for a party, but for a confrontation of truly agricultural proportions. The following Monday, I found a professionally printed banner cable tied to my front gate, the one that clearly stated, Henderson Farm, private property, no trespassing. The banner read, Future site of the Rural Heritage Summer Gala. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, for your generous community spirit. My blood pressure, usually as placid as Baron munching on clover, spiked. This wasn't just ignorance anymore. This was deliberate provocation. The audacity was breathtaking. I cut the banner down with my utility knife, the zip ties snapping with a satisfying crack. I then marched it, rolled up like a defiant carpet, over to Brenda's McMansion. I rang the bell. Gerald, her husband, opened the door. He had the perpetually startled look of a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming Escalade. He blinked at me, then at the banner in my hand. Hi, he mumbled. Is Brenda home? I asked, keeping my voice low but firm. She's, coordinating, he said vaguely, gesturing somewhere into the beige vastness of their house. Brenda's voice then boomed from within. Gerald, who is it? If it's the caterer, tell them I specifically said no cilantro in the artisanal salsa. She appeared, phone pressed to her ear, dressed in a turquoise tracksuit that shimmered under the recessed lighting. She saw me, and her eyes narrowed. Mr. Henderson, to what do we owe the intrusion? I held up the banner. This was on my gate, Brenda. After I explicitly told you my barn is not available. She waved a dismissive hand, adorned with several large, questionable rings. Oh, that. Just a bit of pre-publicity, dear. Building the buzz. The community is thrilled. She winked, as if sharing a delightful secret. Brenda, I said slowly, as if explaining a complex concept to a particularly dense toddler. This is not happening. There will be no gala in my barn. This is trespassing. This is harassment. If you or anyone associated with your event sets foot on my property without my express permission, I will call the sheriff." Her face hardened. The faux friendly veneer cracked, revealing the granite entitlement beneath. "Now, see here, Mr. Henderson. I am the president of this HOA. And this HOA has decided the barn is the ideal location. It promotes our community's rustic charm, which, by the way, benefits your property values too, though you seem ungrateful for it. We've already paid deposits. The invitations are out. It's happening." "It is not," I countered, my voice like ice. "Consider this your final warning. Remove any mention of my property from your materials. Cancel whatever plans you've made that involve my land. If you persist, you will face legal consequences." She scoffed, a truly remarkable sound, like a seal barking through a kazoo. "Legal consequences? Don't be absurd. We're a community organization. You wouldn't dare sue the HOA. Think of the bad press. Think of your neighbors." "My neighbors," I said, "will understand that a man has a right to control his own property, and I assure you, I am not bluffing." I dropped the banner at her feet. "Keep your party off my land." I turned and walked away, her indignant squawks following me down the driveway. "Uncooperative. Selfish. You'll hear from our lawyer." The last threat was almost comical. I had a feeling Brenda's idea of a lawyer was probably her nephew who designed the website, after a quick Google search of legal-sounding phrases. Back at my farm, I knew I had to escalate my own preparations. This woman was clearly delusional enough to think she could simply will her party into existence on my land. First, I called my actual lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chen, who had helped me with agricultural contracts in the past. I explained the situation. Sarah listened patiently, a few dry chuckles escaping when I described Brenda. "Classic HOA overreach, John, but this one's got a special flavor of bonkers," she said. "Okay, first things first. Send a formal cease and desist letter via certified mail. Return receipt requested. We'll draft it now. Detail every point. Private property, prior refusal, warning against trespass. We'll cite the relevant state statutes. That creates an undeniable paper trail." "Already on it mentally," I said. "What else?" "Document everything," Sarah advised. "Keep the flyers, the banner, log all communications, dates, times, what was said, photos if possible, and check your property boundaries. Do you have a recent survey?" "Iron pins are still in place from when I built the barn," I confirmed. "I know my lines like the back of my hand." "Good. Now, about these HOA rights," she mentioned. "Most rural HOAs like yours have very limited powers, usually restricted to genuinely common areas as defined in the covenants. Your barn, on your 10 acres, is almost certainly not a common area, unless there's some bizarre easement you don't know about, which is highly unlikely." We spent an hour drafting a cease and desist letter that was a masterpiece of polite but steel-spined legal threat. It was dispatched the next morning. I also invested in a couple of new high-definition security cameras, discreetly placed to cover all approaches to the barn and my main gate. I already had some for monitoring livestock, but these were specifically for evidence of the two-legged pest variety. A few days later, I received the return receipt for the cease and desist, signed by Brenda herself. For a fleeting moment, I dared to hope. Perhaps the legalese, the official stamp, the threat of actual court, had penetrated her bubble of self-importance. That hope was extinguished when, the following Saturday, a flatbed truck carrying a load of portable toilets attempted to turn into my driveway. I was out checking fences and flagged the driver down before he could get more than 10 feet onto my land. "Morning," I said. "Can I help you?" The driver, a burly fellow with a confused expression, consulted a clipboard. "Delivery for the Rural Heritage Gala? Henderson Barn?" "This is Henderson Barn," I said. "But there's no gala here and these aren't welcome. You're on private property. Who ordered these?" He scratched his head. lady named Brenda. Real enthusiastic. I'll bet, I muttered. Well, Brenda made a mistake. You'll need to take these back. There's no event here. He looked relieved. Fine by me, pal. Less unloading. But she paid in advance. Said to put 'em discreetly behind the big red barn. My barn, I said, pointing at the structure, is not red, and it's certainly not available for toilet storage. I watched him execute a painstaking 10-point turn to get his truck back on the road. The sheer, unmitigated gall of Brenda was astounding. She hadn't just ignored the cease and desist. She was actively proceeding with logistics. The next salvo came in the form of an email, CC'd to the entire HOA mailing list, which I was apparently still on. It was from Brenda, naturally. Dearest neighbors, excitement is building for our summer gala. We've had a tiny hiccup with our generous host, Mr. Henderson, who seems to be a bit camera-shy about his lovely barn. Rest assured, the event is proceeding as planned at this wonderful, historic venue. Sometimes these old-timer farmers get a bit quirky, but we know he's got a heart of gold deep down and wouldn't want to disappoint the whole community. His concerns about bull safety are noted, and we'll have professional animal handlers on site to ensure Baron is perfectly comfortable in a special VIP area during the festivities. See you all there for a night of magic. I read it twice, my jaw tightening with each word. Quirky old-timer farmer? Bull safety concerns? Professional animal handlers? She was not only trespassing but was now planning to interfere with my livestock and slandering me to the entire neighborhood as some sort of eccentric curmudgeon who was just being coy. This was beyond the pale. This was suburban warfare, and Brenda had just massively underestimated her opponent. The special VIP area for Baron gave me an idea. A wonderfully devious, entirely legal, and extremely satisfying idea. If she wanted Baron to be part of the festivities, he would be. Oh yes, he most certainly would. My plan began to crystallize, piece by meticulous piece. Brenda wanted an authentic country feel. Did she? She wanted Baron to have a special VIP area? She'd get it. Authenticity. Guaranteed. I spent the next few days not just fuming, but plotting with the precision of a veterinarian planning a complex surgical procedure. First, I double-checked the barn's internal layout. The main area, where Brenda undoubtedly envisioned her dance floor and cocktail tables, was a large, open space about 60 by 80 feet, with a high ceiling and massive sliding doors at either end. To one side, there were a series of heavy-duty steel pipe stalls, including Baron's oversized boudoir, which had its own gate leading into this main area. Normally, Baron had access to his stall and an attached outdoor paddock. For Brenda's party, his accommodations would be adjusted. I decided to reconfigure the internal gating. I had spare panels of the same heavy-duty steel piping. My idea was to create a very large, very secure, temporary enclosure for Baron that would occupy roughly the entire central portion of the main barn floor. Not just a small corner VIP area, but the prime real estate. He wouldn't be loose and dangerous. Heavens, no. He'd be safely contained. But his container would be so strategically placed and so overwhelmingly present that no party could possibly happen around it. Think of it as a living, breathing, 3,000-pound centerpiece. Next, I considered the locking them in aspect that had been simmering in the back of my mind since Brenda's porta-potty gambit. The main barn doors were huge, heavy, and slid on an overhead track. They could be latched securely from the outside. If a crowd of determined trespassers, led by a sufficiently arrogant HOA president, were to barge in past me, it wouldn't be too difficult to, shall we say, ensure the doors remain closed for a short educational period, not to trap them dangerously, but to ensure they had ample time to appreciate the ambiance I was curating, and to await the arrival of law enforcement, who would then have a contained group of trespassers to deal with. I called Sheriff Brody, a man I'd known for years, a sensible local who understood the difference between a genuine dispute and city folk nonsense. I didn't give him the full theatrical rundown of the Baron von Beefy plan. But I did inform him that my HOA president was threatening to trespass en masse for an unauthorized party on my property, despite a cease and desist order. Brenda Milkington, right? Brody sighed. Yeah, we've had a few interesting calls about her since she took over the HOA, mostly about parking and aggressive leafleting. This is a new level, though. You want us to patrol? I'd appreciate a heightened awareness around the date of the supposed party, which is next Saturday evening, I said. I'm concerned she might actually try to force her way in. I'll be on site, I'll have cameras, and I will defend my property, but I'd rather avoid any physical confrontation if she brings a crowd. Understood, John, Brody said. You've formally warned her. Cease and desist sent. If they come onto your land after that, it's straight up trespassing. Give us a call if they show up, and we'll dispatch someone immediately. Try to keep things calm until we get there. Calm is my middle name, Sheriff, I said, though I privately thought Vindicated might be a more fitting one soon. The week leading up to the gala was a flurry of activity. Not from me preparing for guests, but from Brenda, apparently. I saw a van from Elegant Events Rentals drive slowly past my property, the driver peering curiously at my barn before speeding off when he saw me watching from the porch. My neighbor, old Mrs. Gable from down the road, a lovely woman who made prize-winning jams and had no love for Brenda, called me John, dear, she whispered conspiratorially. Brenda was just on a community Zoom call, which I only joined to see what fresh nonsense she was peddling, and she showed everyone a diagram of your barn with little tables and a dance floor marked out. She said you were just being endearingly modest about hosting, and that the minor bull logistics were all handled. Thanks for the heads up, Mary, I said, shaking my head. The woman's delusion was a force of nature. She also mentioned something about a surprise rustic chic decor reveal that evening. Mrs. Gable added, a hint of amusement in her voice. Good luck, dear. Give Baron a pat from me. My preparations for Baron's VIP suite were completed by Friday. I used the steel panels to construct a pen roughly 40 feet square in the middle of the barn floor. It was rock solid, completely safe for Baron and for anyone outside it. I filled it with fresh straw, his favorite mineral lick, and plenty of fresh water. I even hung a few of his favorite scratching brushes. He seemed quite pleased with the expanded indoor accommodation. The key was that this enclosure, while comfortable for him, rendered the surrounding 30 feet of floor space on all sides practically unusable for a party. It dominated the barn. There was no room for a bluegrass band, no space for mingling with cocktails, and certainly no dance floor, unless you wanted to do-si-do with a steel pipe. The final touch? Aroma. Baron, bless his massive heart, was not an inherently smelly animal. I kept his living quarters meticulously clean. But on the morning of the gala, I decided to give the barn floor around his new pen a good, thorough muck-out of the adjacent stalls that housed a couple of heifers. I didn't spread fresh manure everywhere, just enough in the peripheral areas, combined with the natural, earthy scent of a working barn and its inhabitants, to ensure the authentic country feel Brenda craved was pungent and unmistakable. Fairy lights would have a hard time competing with that particular olfactory signature. My cameras were all active, recording in glorious HD. My phone was charged. My resolve was firm. I even put on a clean shirt. If Brenda Milkington wanted a show, she was about to get one she'd never forget. Saturday evening arrived, draped in the humid haze of a late summer day. The Rural Heritage Summer Gala was scheduled to begin at 7 p.m., according to Brenda's last defiant email, which had also included a map with a crudely drawn arrow pointing to my barn, labeled Party Central. At 6:30 p.m., I led Baron from his usual stall into his new palatial indoor pen in the center of the barn. He ambled in contentedly, sniffed the fresh straw, and settled down for a leisurely chew of his cud. He looked magnificent, a truly colossal bovine monarch surveying his domain. I double-checked the latches on his enclosure. Secure. Then I took up my observation post just inside the main barn door, which I left slightly ajar. I had a clear view of my driveway and the main approach. My lawyer's number and Sheriff Brody's direct line were on speed dial. Right on schedule. At 6:55 p.m., the first car arrived. A shiny Lexus SUV, disgorging a couple in aggressively country chic attire. New cowboy hats, crisp jeans, and boots that had clearly never seen a speck of mud. They paused at the end of my driveway, looking uncertainly towards the house and then towards the barn, probably confused by the distinct lack of valet parking or twinkling fairy lights. They were soon followed by another car, then another. A small convoy of bewildered guests was forming at the foot of my private road. My no trespassing signs were, of course, entirely ignored. Then the flagship arrived. Brenda's white Escalade, gleaming under the fading sun, crunched to a halt at the head of the bewildered pack. She emerged, resplendent in a ruffled denim dress that seemed to be actively fighting with a large turquoise necklace. Gerald trailed behind her, looking even more lost than usual, clutching what appeared to be a portable Bluetooth speaker. "Darlings, welcome," Brenda trilled, her voice carrying easily across the distance. "Don't mind the, rustic approach. Authenticity is key." She gestured grandly towards my barn. "The main event is just through here. Our generous, if slightly shy host is waiting." I watched as she led the charge up my driveway. A gaggle of about 20 to 30 people following in her wake, some looking excited, others deeply skeptical. They passed the first set of security cameras, their faces clearly captured. As they approached the barn, I stepped fully into the doorway, blocking the entrance. "Good evening, Brenda," I said, my voice calm but carrying authority. "You and your guests are trespassing on private property." Brenda stopped short, her smile faltering for a microsecond before snapping back into place, albeit with a brittle edge. "Mr. Henderson? There you are? We were just about to come in. Don't be such a stick in the mud. The party's here." She tried to brush past me. I didn't move. "No, Brenda, it's not. I told you, my barn is not available. You received a legal cease and desist letter. You are all trespassing. I request that you leave my property immediately." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked embarrassed, others annoyed. Gerald fiddled nervously with the speaker. Brenda's face flushed a rather unbecoming shade of puce beneath her tan. "Now you listen to me, you stubborn old goat," she hissed, her voice dropping the pretense of charm. "This party is happening. We have caterers on the way, a band setting up. I am the HOA president, and this is for the good of the community. You can't stop us." She actually puffed out her chest. "Actually, I can," I said evenly. "This is my land. Those are my buildings. And you are not invited." "We'll see about that," Brenda shrieked. And then, with a surprising burst of strength fueled by sheer entitlement, she shoved past me. "Come on, everyone!" she yelled over her shoulder. "Don't let him spoil our fun." This was the moment. As Brenda and her most ardent followers surged through the doorway, I stepped back, letting them pass. It was like a dam of fools bursting. They poured into the dim interior of the barn, chattering excitedly, expecting fairy lights and canapes. What they got was barren. And the aroma, oh, the aroma! As the last few stragglers hurried in, eager not to miss the fun, I calmly reached for the heavy main sliding door. With a well-practiced heave, I slid it shut. The latch clicked firmly into place from the outside. Then, just for good measure, I slid the heavy steel locking pin through the exterior hasp. They were in. And they weren't getting out that way without my help. I walked around to the smaller side access door, also now conveniently secured from the outside, and peered through its small window. The show was just beginning. Inside the barn, the initial excited chatter quickly died down, replaced by confused murmurs, then gasps, and finally, a few distinct shrieks. The ambient light from the high windows was fading, but it was enough to illuminate the scene. There, in the very center of the vast space where the dance floor was supposed to be, stood Baron von Beefy. All 3,000 pounds of him, idly swishing his tail, regarding the sudden influx of strangely dressed humans with mild bovine curiosity. His massive, custom-built pen of steel bars, took up a significant chunk of the real estate, making navigation around him a tight squeeze. And the authentic country aroma I'd so carefully cultivated was now, in the enclosed space, truly blossoming. Brenda, who had charged in deepest, was the first to fully comprehend the situation. She stopped dead, her jaw dropping, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. What is that?" she stammered, pointing a trembling, turquoise-ringed finger at Baron. "That," I called out, my voice easily audible through the thin wooden wall of the side door, "is Baron von Beefy, my prize-winning Charolais bull. You said you had professional animal handlers and a special VIP area sorted for him? He seems quite comfortable in the VIP suite I prepared." A woman in a frilly sundress screamed when Baron let out a low rumbling moo, a sound more akin to a friendly greeting in bullspeak, but to uninitiated ears, probably like the prelude to a charge. Another man, who had been boasting loudly about his ranch back in Texas, which I suspected was a quarter-acre lot with a cactus, scrambled backwards, nearly tripping over a bewildered-looking Gerald, who was still clutching his Bluetooth speaker like a life raft. You can't do this," Brenda finally shrieked, whirling towards the main door and yanking on it futilely. "This is outrageous. Let us out. There's a beast in here." "He's a bull, Brenda, not a beast," I corrected calmly from my vantage point. "And a very valuable one. He's perfectly secure in his pen. You, however, are all trespassing. I did warn you repeatedly." Panic began to ripple through the assembled partygoers. Some were clustered by the main door, rattling it. Others were pressed against the far walls, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the enormous, cud-chewing Baron. The artisanal salsa and country chic cocktails seemed very far away. "Someone call the police!" a man shouted, fumbling for his phone. "Already taken care of," I announced. I had indeed dialed Sheriff Brody the moment the door was secured. I informed them that a group of individuals, led by one Brenda Milkington, had forcibly entered my private barn despite numerous warnings and a legal cease and desist order. They should be here shortly to take your statements. The effect of this announcement was palpable. The rattling on the door ceased. Faces turned even paler. The reality of their situation, trapped in a smelly barn with a giant bull, and the impending arrival of law enforcement, began to sink in. Brenda, however, was not one to be easily cowed by mere reality. "This is assault. This is kidnapping," she yelled, her voice cracking. "I'll have your farm, Henderson. I'll sue you for everything you've got." "For trespassing on my property after being repeatedly warned not to, Brenda?" I asked, my voice laced with the dry amusement I was feeling. "I have video footage of you forcing your way in. I have the signed receipt for the cease and desist. I have witnesses. What do you have? A ruined party on land that isn't yours, and about 30 very unhappy, very fragrant guests." Just then, Baron, perhaps sensing the dramatic tension, decided to underscore my point. He lifted his tail and deposited a truly impressive, steaming pile of fresh manure onto the straw in his pen. The accompanying sound and the fresh wave of authentic country aroma that wafted through the barn caused another flurry of gasps and disgusted groans. One woman dramatically gagged into her sequined clutch. The distant but approaching wail of sirens was music to my ears. Sheriff Brody, true to his word, was on his way. The expressions on the faces of Brenda's guests shifted from panic to a sort of dawning, horrified resignation. Their fabulous gala had officially hit the fan, or, more accurately, the bull. The carefully constructed facade of Brenda's authority was crumbling faster than a day-old croissant in a windstorm. Her reign of HOA terror was about to have a very public, very fragrant, and very satisfying conclusion. The cameras, of course, were recording everything. This footage was going to be pure gold. The arrival of Sheriff Brody and 2 of his deputies was a masterclass in calm authority meeting utter chaos. I unlocked the side door and met them outside, quickly explaining the situation, the repeated warnings, the cease and desist, Brenda's forced entry with her entourage, and my entirely legal and rather satisfying solution of containing the trespassers until help arrived. Brody, a man whose face had seen its share of rural absurdities, actually cracked a small smile when I mentioned Barron's central role. "So, they're all in the barn, John, with the bull?" "Yes, Sheriff. Barron is safely penned, of course. Wouldn't want him to be alarmed by the commotion. But the ambiance is quite distinct." One of the younger deputies was trying very hard not to laugh. Brody just nodded. "All right, let's go have a chat with Miss Milkington and her guests." He slid open the main barn door. The scene that greeted them was something else. About 30 disheveled, unhappy-looking people blinked in the sudden influx of light from the deputies' flashlights. The air was thick with the scent of livestock and shattered entitlement. Brenda stood in the middle, hair askew, denim dress rumpled, face a mask of fury. Barron, in his central pen, regarded the newcomers with placid indifference, occasionally letting out a gusty sigh. "Evening, folks," Brody said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "Sheriff Brody, understand there's been a bit of a misunderstanding about whose property this is." Brenda immediately launched into a tirade. "Sheriff, thank heavens. This man Henderson, he trapped us in here. With that monster, he's assaulted us. He's ruined my event. Arrest him." Brody listened patiently, arms crossed. "Ma'am, Mr. Henderson here tells me he repeatedly informed you that you were not to hold your event on his property, and that he even sent you a legal cease and desist letter, which you signed for. Is that correct?" Brenda sputtered. "Well, yes, but it was for the community. He was being unreasonable. We had deposits paid. The flyers were out." "So you knowingly trespassed?" Brody asked, his voice deceptively mild. "It's not trespassing if it's for the HOA," one of Brenda's more vocal acolytes, a man in a ridiculously oversized belt buckle, chimed in. The deputy next to Brody sighed audibly. "Sir, HOA regulations do not supersede state law regarding private property rights and trespassing." The slow deflation of Brenda and her crew was a sight to behold. One by one, the deputies took names and statements. My security camera footage, which I offered to share, clearly showed Brenda inciting the group to enter, and her being the first to push past me. The caterers, who had arrived mid-kerfuffle and were wisely waiting by their van at the end of the driveway, were interviewed and confirmed they'd been hired by Brenda for an event at Henderson Barn. The bluegrass band, thankfully, had apparently gotten lost and never even made it. The guests were eventually allowed to leave, a dejected, fragrant procession back to their Lexus SUVs and sensible sedans. Many cast furious glares at Brenda, who was now engaged in a heated, though increasingly desperate, argument with Sheriff Brody about her rights and community spirit. Gerald just stood by their Escalade, looking like he wished the earth would swallow him whole, still clutching the Bluetooth speaker as if it were a holy relic. No arrests were made that night, much to Brenda's vocal disappointment. She seemed to think I was the one who should be in cuffs. However, Brody made it very clear to Brenda that she was facing potential charges for trespassing, and perhaps even incitement, depending on what the DA decided. He strongly advised her to have no further contact with me and to consider her HOA presidency on very thin ice. As the last car pulled away, leaving blessed silence and the gentle sounds of Barron contentedly munching hay, Sheriff Brody clapped me on the shoulder. "Well, John," he said, a definite twinkle in his eye, "you certainly know how to throw a memorable party, or rather, how to unthrow one." "Just protecting my property, Sheriff," I said, "and my bull's peace and quiet." "Baron von Beefy, huh?" the younger deputy said, grinning as he looked towards the barn. "He's a legend already." The aftermath was swift and, for me, deeply satisfying. The Rural Heritage Summer Gala Fiasco, or Barnyard Bedlam, as some wags in the wider community started calling it, became the stuff of local legend almost overnight. Mrs. Gable, my jam-making neighbor, reported that the emergency HOA Zoom meeting convened the next day was pure fireworks. Apparently, most of the attendees who had been trapped in the barn with Barron were less than pleased with Brenda's leadership. The threat of legal action from me coupled with the potential for charges from the DA's office and the sheer public humiliation, was enough. Within a week, Brenda Milkington had tendered her resignation as HOA president, due to unforeseen personal circumstances requiring my full attention elsewhere, as her terse email stated. Rumor had it she and Gerald were looking to sell their McMansion and move to a state with less restrictive notions of community engagement. I wished them well, preferably very far away. My lawyer Sarah had a field day with the evidence I provided: the crystal clear camera footage of the trespass, the signed cease and desist, the statements from the deputies. While I ultimately decided not to press for monetary damages, the public shaming of Brenda and the collapse of her little empire was satisfaction enough. Sarah did send a final, very strongly worded letter to the now Brendaless HOA, outlining the full extent of their liability and ensuring they understood that any future incursions onto my property would be met with the full force of the law. The HOA, now led by a chastened and far more reasonable committee, including, to my surprise, the Texas ranch guy, who apparently learned a valuable lesson about authentic farm life, quickly issued a formal apology to me, both privately and in the community newsletter. They also made a donation to the local agricultural youth program in my name, a gesture I actually appreciated. Life on Henderson Farm returned to its peaceful rhythm. Baron Von Beefy, entirely unfazed by his brief moment in the spotlight, continued his placid existence, munching hay, siring future champions, and generally being a magnificent 3,000-pound lawn ornament. He did, however, gain a certain local celebrity. People would sometimes slow down driving past my farm, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bull who single-handedly, or perhaps single-hoofedly, brought down an HOA tyrant. I even had a few folks stop by respectfully at the end of my driveway, asking if they could take a picture of Baron from a distance. I usually obliged. He was, after all, a rather handsome fellow. The biggest change, perhaps, was in the Rural Heritage Estates HOA itself. The new board, humbled and wiser, focused on actual community needs, road repairs, ensuring the shared well was maintained, and organizing genuinely voluntary, low-key events in actual public spaces. There were no more grand pronouncements, no more attempts to commandeer private property for fabulous galas. My barn remained my sanctuary, a place of work and peace, not a party venue. And the tale of Brenda and Baron Von Beefy served as a potent, if somewhat odorous reminder in our little corner of the world: don't mess with a man's bull, and definitely don't try to throw a party in his barn without permission. Because sometimes the most effective form of revenge isn't loud or aggressive. Sometimes it's just calmly letting nature, in this case, a very large, very present bull, take its course. And if you're out there, dealing with your own version of a Brenda, remember, document everything, know your rights, and never underestimate the persuasive power of a well-placed 3,000-pound bull. Thanks for listening to my crazy story. Drop a comment with what you thought, and I'll catch you on the next one.